Here it is, just in behind the petrol station here. This is where the Krawarree is. The Krawarree is what they used to call a sea ambulance, and they were used to pick up wounded soldiers off the beaches up around the islands. It's built of a lovely timber called hew and pine, only available in Tasmania, so these boats were built in Tasmania. This is one of 5 and the last remaining one.
It's a unique boat in that it's a medical boat. A shallow draft was able to get very close to shore, and then they'd have patients and engine personnel brought on board, treated slightly as much as possible, and then taken out off to a larger hospital ship.
I know it's made of hew and pine, which is a very special endangered species that we harvested like there was no tomorrow in southwest Tasmania.
The hew and pine grows incredibly slowly at only 1 millimetre of girth per year. It can live up to 2,500 years and only begins to reproduce at the age of 600 to 800. The tree's massive size and pliability and resistance to shipworm made the hew and pine prized timber for the shipbuilders of yesteryear.
As we can see here, these timber planks run diagonally, and there's another layer underneath that will run the opposite way. So this method is called double diagonal planking, and we can see a bit of wear and tear on the outside, but with a bit of a sanding back and sealing, that'll come up beautifully, that timber. We're very fortunate the timber itself is impervious to white ants and wood rot, so that's why it survived, really. So we're very lucky to have the old girl, the Krawarree.
I know that it holds a lot of stories to a lot of people. Because a lot of those people have now gone, I'm sure they have children, we're seeking out people that can tell their story that has something to do with the harvesting of the hew and pine, the building of the vessel, and people that actually were commissioned to work on this ambulance.
The AH1733 was one of 5 boats built by E.H. Jack. It was made to be used during World War II as an army hospital ship, but the war ended before its arrival. It served in Papua New Guinea to evacuate post-war casualties to awaiting hospital ships. The Krawarree was able to carry 33 stretchers, an emergency operating table below deck, 2 nurses, a doctor and 12 crew. This ship is the only one left of the 5 that were built.
I've done a lot of community things. This is one way out of my comfort zone, but I could see the value of it. I know that there were 5 commissioned, there were 4 built, and there were 3 sunk, and there was 1 left. So we formed a group called the Krawarree Project Limited with the aim of restoring this vessel. And so I met then Bob. Bob's a war veteran. He's served in Vietnam and has extensive knowledge of wooden boats, timber boats, especially this boat. He's followed its journey from where it's been for the last 20 years odd.
I was at the Sanctuary Cove boat show one day, and a friend of mine said there's a lovely old timber boat out the back there. It looks like one of our old boats. And he said, would you mind having a look at it and see if you can check it out? So
it was up on the Gold Coast, and it was sort of melting back into the bush up there, and it was fairly neglected. It was starting to have things taken off it. All of its precious things were taken, like its drive shaft and anything made of brass.
It was then under the control of some Navy people who were calling it the Krawarree, and the Krawarree was one of the 5 vessels built during the war. Anyway, I was fortunate that an old chap that used to drive these boats in the Second World War was still alive, and he was able to put us on the right track, and we found out this was called the Krawarree, and yeah, so it went from there, and the Navy stepped aside and the Army stepped in, and the Gold Coast Council were promising a lot of money to do it up, but it never eventuated. And unfortunately it sat in the paddock for the last 10 to 15 years up the coast, and you can see a lot of the deterioration as a result of that. Fresh water is not the friend of timber, and it's done its damage on the poor old girl, but we're hoping we can get it back to its original form and get it back in the water, because I think it deserves it. It's a World War II heritage listed vessel. We don't know how many lives it saved, but it's certainly out there with some of the old boats from the war.
In my endeavours to find a location to put this boat in the interim until we found somewhere that we could do restoration, full restoration on it, I was lucky enough to have some friends called Paula and Tony Nash. They own the Shell service station at Chindra, and they were very, very kind and hospitable and said that they would give us this enclosed area that we could put the boat. It's safe, it's secure, and it's also a little bit in the public eye, so you can have a peek at it when you come by.
Okay, we're just entering the main medical area here, and down the sides of the vessel there would be access for 33 wounded soldiers. In the middle section here, down the centre line, there is an operating table, and above that a hatch which is able to open up, and by way of a davit mounted on the vessel, we can lift people straight onto an operating table. Just entering into the main machinery space here, the engine room, and you'll see there's quite a bit of rubbish here. We're cleaning up the vessel as much as we can. And over to our right, these are the old bearings from the propeller shafts here. Back in those days there wasn't a lot of material available. These timbers are what they call lignum vitae. It's a fairly rare African timber, and they use it as a bearing. You can see here the shafts went through that area there. There's some hull damage here. You can see the deck rotted away there to some degree, but if you notice, the hull itself was still reasonably sound. That's the hue and pine. We're coming up to the fuel tanks here on either side of us. As we go through, you can see the size of these fuel tanks. As I said, in the early days of the war, they had petrol engines in these boats, and unfortunately when you put a bullet into a tank of petrol, it quite often explodes. So the diesel engines were very good. And as we exit the fuel storage area, these steps here lead up to the wheelhouse, and just to my right is the captain's cabin, so if he was called to the bridge he could come straight up into the wheelhouse. If you look up there, that's the deck from the original wheelhouse section, but the actual timber used in the refurbishment of the wheelhouse wasn't up to scratch, and it all collapsed. So that's what we're left with, is the deck there. Coming into the main cruise area here, we've got the toilet on the right hand side there, and crew accommodation. To our right we've got the stores area there. Just coming into the main accommodation area here, as you can see the bunks there. In addition to the cruise accommodation, we'd have the medical staff need to have somewhere to sleep as well. A lot of them would maybe hot bunk here or go up into the wheelhouse area, the main cabin. As you can imagine, in the tropics up here, and they'll be away for months at a time, and it gets quite warm. They have a forced air system through the accommodation here. You can see some of the fittings, the brass fittings here, still original. It was my choice, working in the tropics, to sleep on deck in a hammock. It was the best.
I think it's really important to restore this because it's the last remaining example of a double-lapped hue and pine medical ambulance boat belonging to the Army. This boat just has all of those essences that the apprentices could come and play and work with, use it educationally for sea cadets, having the public come through and seeing how you took care of people that were injured in desperate circumstances.
We're looking for a place that we could take the ship straight to and perform reconstruction or remedial work to it. But we can't do that where it's located at the moment. We need to find a new location where a DA will be approved for taking on extensive works that need to be done to this ship.
Built-in lawn cistern out of the hue and pine. It's the last remaining one, so it's a unique example of not only a ship and a function, but just the materials, that beautiful wood that actually makes it unique on so many fronts that it really is a complete requirement that it should be preserved as the last standing, last floating image of an Army ambulance ship.